This video is just a massive Q&A on the design process, creative process, understanding your wiring, dealing with bad creative directors, job stuff, and starting projects when you don't have a lot of confidence because you haven't been great at finishing projects. No real need to do an intro on this one. I hope you dig it. Okay, so you have a project, creative director creates the look, hands it to you, and when you get that thing, you feel like, almost like your hands are tied. And the other thing is your head's not totally wrapped around it because it's not your thing. My old job, we used to get these campaigns from cities. You know, they'd work on these campaigns forever, but they would come to the US and the US was like, I don't know, didn't have European sensibilities. So they'd want to figure out how to turn it into your deal. And that's partially where a lot of this idea comes out of. You have to figure out how to turn that thing that your CD made and turn it into your thing. This would be the way I would look at it. There's kind of two ways to do it. If you feel like this CD did real research to get to where they got to, then you need to find out what it was they did that got them to that point. And then you need to sort of recreate those steps on your own. And this is like what we used to have to do on this city stuff. Like we essentially had to go back and do their research again so that we would be on the same page intellectually or like at an empathetic level. But then the other way to do it, and this is what I use for my own projects if I want to expand them. There's like a project on our website actually. There's like this little flat digital only cover for Josh Harmony. That thing has a full actual design process, but it was really only intended to be this one little cover to go on Spotify or Bandcamp or whatever. And then I wanted to later expand it into a package for a portfolio piece. So this is the methodology I use. The research is to take that existing thing, forget everything else that you know about it that precedes the visual, and to break it down and figure out the DNA of it. So if there's a concept, what's the concept? But beyond that, what's the typography about? What's the color palette? What's the compositional strategy? How does texture play into it? Like, how does white space play into it? All of that stuff. And essentially treat that thing as if it's like a brand identity that just was never finished, and it's your, and like, imagine like the person who made it died or quit, slightly less darker. You take that, figure out the design intent of it, and then literally make your own micro brand guidelines and then start making stuff from that. That's would be my strategy. And I definitely struggled with the thing that you're describing. When I would get stuff from other people, I would get really frustrated because like my head or heart wasn't in the thing that they had made. But then on top of that, even with my own stuff, I sometimes wouldn't know how to take what was meant to be a poster and turn it into an exhibition title wall or something like that, whatever it might be. And I didn't know how to get to like the right level of depth to where it felt like actual work. So it's almost like you just figure out everything that's happening in front of you, and then you just type up a set of rules, or you type up like a one-page campaign or brand guideline, and then start from there. I talk about this a lot, but that one of the reasons projects are boring and we procrastinate on them is because the sense of adventure is gone. And there's definitely a sense of adventure that's not happening when you just get something from someone else. So then how do you jump into it? I think the challenge is how to make it fun. And I think in these times right now, you really have to make it fun because it is easy to wander away from your desk, to go get distracted, to go do something else with no one looking over your shoulder, and then to suddenly need to come back to that desk at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night and deal with the thing that you put off at 10 in the morning. I think if you can apply a methodology to that, that puts you in really good shape. So let's see, the frustration is that I get what you're saying, but when it's my turn to do the work, that's where she falls down. I'm assuming that that's the project falls down. It's just practice. I mean, I'm going to say the other hard thing that no one ever wants to hear, but the situation you're in might not be a good fit. The thing you don't want to do is assume that because projects are routinely falling apart or falling short, that that's because of you. But you're working in an ecosystem with other actors. It might just be that you're in the wrong one. I've been in a bunch of those. So it's really important not to personalize it, and it's really important to figure out, like, if you start tweaking things, does the situation change? If you're tweaking things and the situation stays the same, then the answer is you need a new situation. I mean, my job, I'm not trying to make it sound like everybody else is stupid and you're smart or whatever, but you have to make sure that you're doing things that you feel good about and you feel are the right answer. But then the world is made of people who see things differently. The other thing that I would throw out is figure out how you can modify the process so that you can do lots of options. That's huge. It's huge because ultimately the idea that you're going to make one thing and one person is going to love it is a huge gamble. But on top of that, the more stuff people see, the less harsh they are, because they're more likely to see something they like. But then two, the less likely they are to stomp all over it in an attempt to make it theirs. But it's going to come down to, I think, process. The process needs to work for you. You'll know that it works when the work gets easier, and it's trial and error. Like, the process stuff for me has been unfolding over the last 8 years, messing with a creative process and seeing the results. That took a really long time. It's not going to be so easy as like, oh, just do this thing, because that process has to be 100% working for you. How did you get over the fear of just getting started? I feel like I have a lot of ideas, but I've never been an executor. I'm only 22, so I know I have the potential to change. Is your question related to that, or is it related to other kind of creative work? Personal projects, I want to start a brand. Okay, cool. Let's get into a bunch of things here. One is, it's in terms of starting stuff, it's super important to understand the particular way that you're wired. So if you're 22 and you feel like you've never been an executor, but you've been heavy on planning kind of your whole life, I am going to go out on a limb and say that executional part is not really going to change unless you find some way to get kind of massive leverage over yourself. There's like this Tony Robbins idea that if you want to get yourself to do something, you have to get emotional leverage over yourself. So in a really extreme example is, if you want to stop doing drugs, go to the morgue and look at bodies of people who've had drug overdoses. Now, obviously that sucks and is very heavy, but that's an extreme example. A smaller example is, if I start this brand and it's successful, I get to quit my job. And you have this leverage. Now the problem is, does leverage work for you? Like for me, leverage only works for very extreme things. I'm basically afraid of jail. And I don't know if I'm afraid of other stuff that I should be afraid of. So I do my taxes. So I don't use leverage to get myself to do anything personal because it doesn't work for me. It just adds to a pile of stuff I feel bad about. I can use leverage to do my jobby job because I'll get fired and then I won't have money. So that sucks, but I can't use it on personal stuff. So then the thing to figure out is, what's the working model that makes the most sense for you? So one, you do have to get used to being an executor, but you might have to stop planning to do that. You might have to shoot really small and low at first in order to get really comfortable with making stuff, failing, and screwing up. And that if you can do that, you'll start getting started. But the thing I will point out is, like, the point in time we're at, never been better to start anything. If you really wanted to, you could start whatever, a t-shirt brand with no money up front. You could use a trial. I guess you could spend $9 a month on a big cartel thing. You could design the stuff yourself. You could do the fulfillment through like Printful, and then you'd have a brand with no money up front. Contrast that with if you're an old man like me, if in 2002 even I wanted to start a t-shirt brand, I would have to order hundreds of shirts, like 144 right off the bat of one shirt in one color. So like that got in the way of a lot of people, but you're in this environment that you might not be aware of, because it's now like oxygen, that you can do almost anything you want for free, which makes the risk of failing way low. And if you get comfortable with that, it kind of helps you from not getting caught up in stuff. And then the other thing to think about is that a lot of times we don't start stuff because we're afraid of what other people can think. And the big thing to remember is, in the immortal words of the band Self-Defense Family, no one who matters cares. So the people who matter don't give a shit what you do with your time and your effort. It's the people that suck who do. So make sure that that's not getting in the way. So I'm going to back up to this other thing of like being 20 years out and still struggling with some aspects of being a designer. It's true of everyone. That's why when you go to functions with designers or creatives, the number one topic is always going to be the client sucks, the CD sucks, the boss sucks, somebody sucks. Now, granted, a lot of people in the world suck, but the biggest thing that is happening is that the context kind of determines what's going on. And I think a lot of stuff in the sort of creative world sucks because of the way the work is being enacted. I'm of the opinion that most everyone kind of does the same thing, which is they get a project, they do whatever they were going to do, they kind of bang around different corners, they get an idea, they try it, it sucks, they get another idea, they try it, they sucks, they freak out, they go on walks for 4 days straight, it doesn't work, they read a book, all of a sudden they go, oh, it's this, and then they make the thing, and then the client hates it, and now you're back to square one. You know, people say the design process or the creative process is a mystery. I think it's a mystery individually to different people. I don't think it should be a mystery to the person enacting the process. And I think that struggling 20 years into a creative career is standard. I don't think it's unusual. And I don't think it's anything to beat yourself up about. But the thing that I would throw out there is the 4 words I kind of live by, which is pain is a warning. Whenever you're struggling, whenever things don't feel right, whenever you're frustrated, that is telling you that something else is messed up. So if you're still struggling, then the big thing is the struggle is always going to be the result of the process. Whatever process you use to make the work is either going to lead to joy or struggle. And if you embrace the idea that instead of saying, man, I've been doing this for 20 years, it should be easier. No, it shouldn't, because you haven't really changed what you've been doing over 20 years. You're probably still doing the same process you did in school, which is an anti-process. It's like not an actual process. It's random and it's chance, and you picked up bits and pieces. So if you're still struggling, you start actually figuring out what your process is, and then you start messing with that and conducting experiments. Because look, like, let's see, I'm 17 years into a career, but I started designing as like a teenager in like 1995 or 6, and I did the exact same thing from 1995 or 6 to 2012. I thought I was doing different stuff. I thought I was progressing. I don't think I was. I think I just got better at using software. I'm better explaining what I was doing. But at one point I decided my process sucked and that it needed to be fixed. I will say 100% that I operate off the idea of feelings as the number one metric of whether things are working. that if I am happy, then chances are the work is good. And if I am frustrated, I don't care what I did up to that moment, whatever I did was stupid and it sucked. So I was frustrated from like the year 2000 to the year 2011 to varying degrees. And as far as I'm concerned, all the work I made from that time period, some of it works, some of it looks good, some of it's whatever, some of it won awards. But as far as I'm concerned, it all sucks because it didn't make me happy doing it. And that once the work started making me happy doing it, I think the work got really good. And I think that's really important. Yeah, and a really important thing that I will just leave anybody with is your work isn't good or bad because of what some other human being thinks about it. Your work is good or bad based on what you think about it. I might have got myself in super hot water at my last job because the CD was all bummed out about a meeting because a client didn't like the work. Not didn't like it, they didn't take it. And I burst out laughing, not in the presence of the client, obviously, but I burst out laughing that they didn't like it. And I said, that makes sense. It was awesome. And I think he really took that the wrong way. Because like, I don't care what anybody thinks about my work, not a person on the planet. And I think that that's hyper important because you never know what's going to happen. You can't be dependent on other people to determine whether or not your work is good. So this is like why I'm so dead set on process. My belief is that I set up a process for success and then I do the thing. And the only thing that determines whether that work is good is, did I follow the process faithfully? Did I not cheat it in some way, which is like personally defined by me? And did I do my best given the time and context? If I can say yes to those three things, then the work is good. I don't care what anyone else on the planet thinks about it. A lot of the stuff that I do in terms of generating a lot of versions of stuff, it does two things. It makes me love it, but it also makes it that it's easier to deal with clients. So that's what's super cool. What about your process has changed since the Through Process podcast? That's a good question. So I did a podcast for maybe 2 years with another design educator called Through Process. I think that was right at the beginning of me embracing process. The biggest change that I feel like I've figured out since that time is I started using ideation processes to come up with ideas for work. And I think one of the early podcasts we talked about the specific processes of projects that we were doing. And I had started using bed-no diagrams. What a bed-no diagram is basically, it's like this grid and you load concepts into it and then you use the grid to force yourself to mash up those concepts. It's just a nice way of getting to unexpected results. But at the same time as that, I also decided that I would always do overkill at every step in the process. So if I thought I needed 2 days of research, I would do 3 days of research. And if I thought I needed 2 days of sketching, I would do 3 days of sketching. But what I struggled with for a long time was, how do you do smaller projects? Because I tried all these versions of trying to take research, analysis, ideation, sketching, design, or whatever. I tried to figure out how to make that stuff small enough to make it work for smaller projects or for shorter projects. And I think the big thing I came to was like, it's impossible. Like, I don't believe that you can. I believe you can get lucky and have a concept in a day, but I don't think if you were to tell me like you need me to do a poster and it has to have a concept, I need 2 weeks, 2 full-time weeks to do that, period, to guarantee results. So the stuff that I talk about in some of the videos now and the way I've done like every MVA project now for the last 2 years is a process that doesn't require research or ideation in the traditional sense. It takes what some people would probably call like mood boarding, but it makes that the core part of the process, and it's non-conceptual, it's vibey. And I do that with students now too. And I think once you've done it a few times, you realize that, you know, if you do a traditional design process in a short period of time, like you try to condense it down to 2 days and it never works, you just sit there wishing you had more time. And you're lucky if you can get one okay thing out during that time. But the switching the process entirely means that, like, the way that it works with us is, if you can give me a month to do a project, but you're broke, if I have 25 hours over the course of a month, I know that by the end of the month, I can show you 10 concepts, that the process will generate material throughout. And then if you only have, say, 2 or 3 days, I will do a totally different process that, again, I believe guarantees results, but you won't get a conceptual thing. You will get a vibey thing, but I think you'll get an original thing. I don't know if that's my process changing or that's it expanding as I kept trying to find hacks to figure out how to do a project in a shorter period of time where the process was still rich. And it took 6 years to hit on something that really worked. And it actually came through teaching. It came through doing like one-night workshops and watching students work on stuff that it was experimental that I was having them do, and realizing that it was highly productive and that maybe it would start working for me. Not much else has changed since then, especially my teaching process. I brought back having deadlines because I had gotten rid of deadlines for a while. I still hate critiques. Most of my critiques are me trying to get the students to do so much work that I can just be like, that's dope, that's dope, that's dope, that's dope, that's dope, do more. Would you say your process is just start making, think later? I can see how it would seem that way. It's actually not quite. I try to have a really rich practice in terms of, I've got 2 or 3 different kind of photo projects that I'm working on at any given time, and I make music, and I make weird crappy paintings whenever I can. And that stuff feeds design, but it's not related to it. When I have a non-conceptual design process, like an example would be, you come to me and you want me to design a identity for what's the opposite of organic? A super GMO grocery store. And you tell me you need it in a week. I'm gonna tell you, I cannot come up with a concept in a week, so you don't get a concept. Like, I'm not gonna come up with a concept. What I'm instead gonna do, I'm going to interview you, but then I'm just going to capture every single thought I have about GMOs, and that's going to be my research. And then I'm going to take those things, try to turn them into visual representations of that idea, and then I'm going to make like 1 million mood boards based around those. We're going to randomly throw stuff out. I'm trying to think of all stuff that's like corporate and cold and maybe icky. Pharmaceutical packaging, weird rubbery fetish photography, stuff that's frozen, maybe things that are in like crazy blister packaging. I'm just gonna make this crazy pile of mood boards around these different themes. And then I'm gonna show them all to the client and be like, I'm thinking about this over here, this over here, this over here, this over here. And if they're like, ooh, please don't explore that fetish photography, I'm gonna be like, okay, cool, I won't. They help me edit down that list. And then I will start making stuff, exploring each of those buckets separately. Now, what'll happen is as I'm working, I will start thinking more and post-rationalizing, and things will start banging against each other. I'll start being like, oh, this reminds me of this. And so I'll get that stuff. But let's say nothing springs up. It's literally going to be like, oh, GMOs are like this, so the design is like this, this, and this. But it's not going to be predetermined. I'm going to make a bunch of stuff based off those themes, and then I'm start jamming it together. So that's like, to me, a non-conceptual approach, because you never explicitly say, okay, it's about GMOs, and GMOs are artificial, therefore the concept is X. The insight is this. Can you explain your process for us not familiar with it, and maybe how it changed from pre-2012? So pre-2012, my process was what I think most graphic designers' process is. You get a brief, and if you think you need to do research, you do research. If you don't think you need to do research, you don't. Maybe you consider the brief the research, maybe you consider a meeting with the client the research. But you kind of only do research if you think that you need to do it. Then you try to come up with ideas. So you're driving around, you're thinking about stuff, you see a book in your house, you're like, oh, that reminds me of this. But this very haphazard process where creativity is a mystery. There's no method to it. Maybe you freak out at the last minute because you can't have an idea, so then you do some research, but it's all very random. Every project went sort of the same and sort of differently. You know, we would tell clients that we're going to try to have 3 versions, but we usually had 1 because it was hard to come up with 3 versions. It was typical and it was somewhat mysterious to me. What ended up happening was a good thing was at some point I became a massive egomaniac. The process was still mysterious, but I believed in myself and my taste so much that it wasn't hobbled by insecurity. So that was a plus. Once it wasn't hobbled by insecurity, I started to think I could be better at this. I think I could do better than I'm doing, and I didn't know what that meant until I was teaching one day, and I gave out an assignment, and I just decided to ask the students, like, when are you gonna do this, and what's the first step? And in a class of like 20 kids, nobody could tell me when they would work on it, except for there's always that one person that has their shit together, but they couldn't tell me what they were gonna do. They couldn't tell me what the first step was, and I was listening to it, and I just distinctly had this moment of like, God damn, these kids have no process, and they're describing my process, and I hadn't really realized it, and I had a kind of total freak out, not a freak out, but I just was like, I'm gonna change some stuff up. I realized like I wasn't going to get better at design. I felt like all I could get better at was the stuff that led to the final piece. So I decided to use these things called bed no diagrams that I had to use once as a student, but I didn't like. But basically it's like this thing where you've got this grid, you know, if you're designing a rap record cover circa 2001, you'll be like, one side might be subject matter and the other side might be some other kind of theme or like a surface. So let's say bling and gold. So here's my bed no diagram for my circa 1990s rap record, right? Circa early 2001s. The subject matter for the cover will either be a girl in a bikini or a nice car, and then the treatment will either be blinged out with diamonds or made of gold. So then you go across and you match all of these up, and then you go through and you just make sure that you investigate everything. The idea is that you'd have like 10 and 10, and then it forces you to have ideas you wouldn't normally have. And then the other step was to then push each part of the process further and to do things like always do real research. So the first project I did it on, the first thing I did was I went to the library and took a bunch of books out on the subject matter, and then I didn't let myself do anything until I had read them. And I just jotted down notes. And then when I did like my sketching, I forced myself to do so many sketches. And that was really different for me for when I do design work. I just explained that other process before, the more vibey one. This is if the project has to be conceptual. Somebody says, I want you to do a poster, and the poster needs to be a concept. Like this exhibition of artists, all the artists know each other and have worked together. So how can I represent those relationships? And to do that, I have to have a process, because otherwise it's too hard for me to just randomly be like, okay, let's make a thing. If this video gave you any ideas of stuff you would like me to talk about in a future video, please leave a comment. Here's a clip from our next episode, which is some very brutal advice for anyone considering going into a design program at a private art school. If you get a free ride, ignore this video. Doesn't matter. But if you got a sign on the dotted line to be able to go to the school of your choice, then this shit matters. So, number one, do not go if you don't know what you want to major in. There is this notion that you should spend a year figuring it out. That's completely stupid. That's horseshit. That's, let's see, what are we talking? $30,000 spent to figure it out.